Today, we're going to talk about how to master difficult conversations. Whether you realize it or not, you probably engage in a half a dozen difficult conversations any given day. And if you can approach these conversations really well, you are going to get an opportunity to build the career, the life, the relationships that you want. Unfortunately, most of us really struggle with stepping into difficult conversations. We struggle to say what we mean what we say, deal with the potential conflict or distress or tension in these conversations. And so we give up these opportunities to shape our careers, to shape our lives, to get our needs met. There is in psychology a six-step process to articulating your perspective assertively. What I have done is take that six-step process and condense it into the three most important pieces for you to remember and to focus on. So while we go through this exercise, if you would like, there's a worksheet that accompanies this, and you can open up the worksheet and start thinking about how you would complete the different steps in this process. As I go through this exercise, I want you to think about an important conversation, something that you have been meaning to have that's important to you that maybe you've been avoiding or you don't know how to start it, so that you have a very specific conversation is in mind as you're listening to this. And hopefully by the time we get through this, you will have the process and the script to have this critical conversation as soon as possible. So, the first part to mastering any kind of difficult conversation is getting clear on your why. Specifically, why are you going to make yourself uncomfortable? Why would you step into a space where there's a potential for conflict or discord? Very often, when I ask that question to people, they will start by telling me that they just want to be heard. They want the other party to get their perspective or their point of view. And I'm going to tell you right now that is not enough. Picture this. Imagine finally mustering the courage to speak to a colleague about the fact that every time you are in a meeting together, they interrupt you and they speak over you. Imagine having this conversation and having the colleague in that moment genuinely acknowledge how frustrating this must be for you, genuinely seem to get that their behavior is inappropriate and undermining. Now, picture being in a meeting with them a week later and having them repeat that behavior. Would you really consider that your initial critical conversation was successful just because they seemed to understand you and they got your point of view? Clearly not. You were having this conversation because you were expecting a specific change, and that is your why. So, anytime you have the opportunity to plan for a difficult conversation, the first thing you need to establish is what your objective is. And usually you are looking for a very specific, tangible behavioral shift. What is that shift? What does it look like? Imagine that you're asking for somebody, one of your leaders, to give you autonomy. Don't just think of autonomy or more autonomy as your objective. Outline what more autonomy would look like so that you can give that person a blueprint to follow so that they can execute on this objective for you. Understanding your why has several advantages. One is you're going to get your need met. But second of all, as is often the case in difficult conversations, there are so many opportunities to get sidetracked. There are going to be a lot of times where, as you're presenting the things you need, the person you're talking to is going to start talking about what they need. And the conversations can diverge in many different directions. By having clarity around what your why is, you are going to have the tools and the opportunity to bring the conversation back to your objectives and your needs and make sure that those get addressed before you end the conversation. So, this is the moment, if you want, to press pause on this video, to grab your worksheet, and to sit down and think about this specific conversation you want to have and try to identify what is your objective in the conversation. And were your objective to be met, what would it look like? What are specific markers of success, pointers, or objective shifts, behaviors, actions that the person you're speaking to can take to meet your needs? Once you have determined why you're going to bother to have the conversation, the next thing you have to explore is what, and very specifically, what kind of pushback, what kind of resistance are you going to face from the people you're speaking to? Now, this is going to require to use a lot of emotional intelligence to figure out what you know about the person you're speaking to. You can revisit some past conversations you've had with them. And your goal here is to determine two things about this resistance, about this pushback. First of all, what is it going to be about? So, what are the topics? What do they need? What are their perspectives? I like to think about pushback and in terms of yes buts. What are their yes buts going to be in this conversation with you? The second thing you want to also get a handle on is what is that resistance, what's that pushback going to look like? People have different styles of communication. So sometimes when people feel very resistant to an idea, when they feel surprised or taken aback in a difficult or a critical conversation, you'll see tempers rise, right? Fight or flight kicks in, and what you're seeing is fight. Maybe you're going to be having a conversation with somebody who is prone to raising their voice or moving closer to you or posturing in ways that feel aggressive to you. Or maybe you're going to talk to somebody whose response to these kinds of situations is to get really quiet. They're going to look, they're going to listen, they might shut you down in your head, in their head, excuse me, but they're not going to respond to you. Maybe they're extremely conflict avoidant, so their goal is going to be to try to exit the conversation as soon as possible. Another thing I've seen before is people who look so open to change. And I know you have a few of these people in your world who, when you bring up important topics, will say, yes, of course. It seems like they're engaged and they're willing to meet you where you are. But there's no follow through in the background, right? So thinking, is this the style that this person is going to employ? Where they're going to go, I understand this is very important. Yes, of course, we'll try to do something, but really they're not going to move forward in the action. Sometimes you have people who stonewall, and you can really look at their body language to determine that, right? Do they sit back and start crossing their arms? Right? Do they start shutting themselves off? Are they turning away from you? You want to be able to figure out what that resistance is going to look like so you can spot it as soon as it happens, but also so that when you spot it, it doesn't trigger you. Taking the time to figure out what somebody's pushback, what their resistance is going to be about, and what it's going to look like allows you to meet that resistance with less negative emotion. It allows you to stay calmer when you see the pushback come back. And the other beautiful piece about it, which we're going to get to in the next stage, is it allows you to strategically and empathetically respond to the pushback. Something that your other your co-person in the conversation is not going to expect. Because for most of us, when we enter these difficult or crucial conversations, what we assume, what we expect is to have a back and forth, right? There's a volleying. And most of us expect to yes but somebody and to get a yes but in return. So imagine how disarming it is to have somebody come at you and say, I can definitely see that. I was thinking about what your position might be here. And one of my thoughts was that you would probably want or need, and then go into those things. It's so disarming. And in the best kind of ways, right? So it's going to increase the likelihood of a collaborative engagement on whatever this topic is. So you can press pause right now on this video if you are working on a specific difficult conversation script. And I want you to think of the person or the people that you are going to be having this conversation with. Think about what you need. Think about the subject that you're bringing up, and what do you think their perspective is going to be? And based on their perspective, what do you think their pushback is going to be about? And what is this resistance going to look like? What is their style going to be? Now that you've done that, the next step is, and the final step in this process, is to answer the question how. And how again breaks down into two parts. First and foremost, How will you bridge the gap between what you need and what the other person needs? This is why, among other things, you spend so much time to stop and think about what somebody's perspective, what their resistance, and what their pushback will be. I want you to think about whether or not there are concessions you can make. I want you to think about how you can collaboratively come to a solution that is a win-win solution. I want you really to think about in this conversation, what are your needs versus what are your wants? You're going to want to stay really strong on your needs and maybe let go of some of your wants. The other thing you want to figure out on the how piece is, how are you going to stay calm? Because here's the fact: no matter how prepared you are, no matter how much work we've done to script this conversation before it happens, the reality of difficult conversations is that most of them are very emotional. They will feel emotional to you, and they will probably feel emotional to the other party. And because they're emotional, there are all these opportunities for our brain to basically short circuit, to get a surge in the emotional part, and that will short circuit our rational thinking. And once our rational thinking is short circuited, well, we don't argue very well. And I'm thinking of arguing in terms of debating, not in terms of fighting. So it's essential to stay as calm as possible because this will allow you to think through what people are saying, to actually listen to people, right? To give them the courtesy of listening to them. And it will also help you figure out what your next move needs to be. So the first step to remaining calm in any situation is to remember to breathe out. When we get emotionally activated, especially when we get emotionally activated by something that makes us feel cornered or lost or that feels really important, usually what kicks in is the fight or flight mode. And in fight or flight mode, we tend to start gearing ourselves up for a combat, for an attack, which means that our muscles get really tense and we tend to breathe in and then we hold our breath. The more you do that, the more there's a negative feedback loop that's going to kick in and that's going to make you feel more and more tense. So, what I want you to remember when I say breathe is simply breathe out. I often recommend to people that they write the word breathe or that they put a sticker or a symbol somewhere on a paper or around their computer if they're doing this conversation virtually, but they put a reminder somewhere to breathe out. And as you breathe out, the big focus is just allow your muscles to relax. Because you'll notice your shoulders will creep up and just allow them to relax. Watch what your hands are doing. Are they really tense? Allow them to relax. Speaking about this feedback loop between the way our bodies manage stress and the way emotionally we manage stress, I want you to think about entering these conversations and maintaining a body posture that is both aligned with confidence and with being calm. So there is a feedback loop between the way our bodies carry themselves and our facial expressions and the way we feel. It's easy to see in one direction. We know that when people are happy, they tend to smile. We know that when people are very sad, they tend to cry, right? So we can see that an emotion will change the way we look. But what you might not realize is that the way you hold your facial structure, the way you hold your body can also impact an emotion. It can magnify it or it can reduce it. There's a reason a lot of us, when we get really nervous about something, a lot of us will start to smile. It's nearly like the body's trying to short circuit the anxious response by putting a lighter response there. So here's some things I would like you to think about. One, if you're having this conversation standing up, I want you to think about standing up and keeping your feet apart, really specifically in this A form. It doesn't need to be huge, but this tendency that some of us have to cross our legs is not going to work in your favor. The other thing I want you to pay attention to are your hands. When we get anxious, when we get nervous, we tend to ball them, but think about what the balling of hands is about. It's about punching, right? It's a very aggressive move. So try to think of leaving your hands relaxed. I like holding my hands like this. If I'm in front of somebody, maybe you have a mug of coffee or a clipboard or something that you can hold on to that allows your hands to stay a little bit more relaxed. The other thing I want you to think about is the way you're carrying your back and your spine and your head. So when we feel under threat, when we feel weak, what we tend to do as humans is to roll ourselves in. We're trying to protect all of these soft organs here, right? The problem with this is, again, it's this feedback loop between the way my body's positioned and the way I feel internally. If I want to feel confident, which you are going to need both to be able to move through this conversation, but also in order to make an impact in this conversation, I need your body to open up. That does not mean you need to stand like this. I'm not asking you to compress your lower back, but think of rolling your shoulders back, bringing your head in, and a little bit like a ballerina, because this is where I first heard of it. Pretend you have a string going up from the top of your head. It's incredible. You can like grow a couple inches just by picking yourself up. And ultimately, what this is about is picking your diaphragm up so you're not collapsed on your diaphragm. So diaphragm open, shoulders back. And this, even with your hands slightly apart, is an incredibly powerful position, both in terms of you feeling more grounded and confident, but also in terms of the way other people are looking at you and allowing you to appear bigger and more grounded without it being incredibly aggressive. If you are seated, one of my recommendations is to sit and to push yourself sideways and put your arm around the back of a seat. This will force your body here to stay open, again, maintaining that confidence posture. But then it's also something of a power move, right? It's not as aggressive or as obnoxious as somebody who stands like this or stands like this with their arms around both sides of a chair. It is just open enough to convey being relaxed, and it allows your body, it gives you something to rest on, and it allows you to maintain a more relaxed position while still remaining professional and still remaining friendly. I know a lot of women complain about being told to smile more. And I agree that there are many contexts in which we are asked to smile that really are unfair and biased. But in this case, I am going to recommend that you think of a smile as a tool or a weapon, but mostly a tool that you can use to benefit you and all parties in the conversation. When you smile, your body secretes several neurotransmitters that lead to you feeling better and feeling calmer. From the time we are born, even in infancy, children smile, even blind children smile, because smiling is an adaptive response that signals trust and friendship. So if you can walk into these conversations, you don't need to, you know, have a huge grin, but walk into these conversations and think about when I'm talking about something I need, how can I keep a quarter or have a smile on my face? First and foremost for myself, because keeping that smile will help me feel more confident, more relaxed, but also because it signals to other people that I am coming as a friend. And my hope is that with the function of mirror neurons, the person across from me might start off smiling too, which will reduce their stress and will make them feel better in this conversation. So that's for the physical behavioral aspects of how to stay calm. There are two other things that I want to bring to your attention in terms of being able to stay calm. One is as you're having conversations with this person, as you're progressing through the difficult conversation, if they start mentioning things that are really triggering to you, one of the tools you can use instead of asking them why or shutting down is to ask questions that are designed to gain more understanding. So it might look something like this. I hear you tell me that this is really important to you. Could you tell me a little bit more about it? I understand that you wanted to approach this project a little differently. What is it? What is it about the approach that I'm proposing that seems difficult to you? Could you help me understand it more? That idea of can you help me understand has a couple of benefits. One, you're going to gather data, right? This is giving you a window into the other person's mind so you have a better idea why they're so opposed to whatever it is you need or want. Second of all, it creates a bridge. In asking people to explain to you what their perspective is, you're going to allow them to feel seen and heard and considered. And a lot of times, again, when we find ourselves in these crucial conversations or in conflict with other people, our assumption is that the person across from us has no interest in what we need or what we want. right? It becomes a fight off the bat. If you can ask the right questions, the person might realize that you're not trying to fight, you're trying to find solutions. And then the third benefit is, well, sometimes asking those kinds of questions gives you breathing room. So while the person is answering, you can remind yourself to breathe. You can check on your body posture. You can relax any signs of tension. You can start thinking about what's the best way of bridging the gap given the new information or knowledge that you have. And last but not least, I want to remind you that most big, complex, important conversations are multi match, multi round conversations. So if ever you're talking to somebody and you've prepared this beautiful plan for how to address these issues, and yet you see that the conversation is not going where you want it to go, well, it's okay. What I want you to realize is it's okay to step away. Let that person know that they've given you a lot to think about, that you'd like to mull it over, and you'd like an opportunity to revisit the conversation. Ideally, you plan on a follow up time, then walk away. You now have more data, you have more information to prepare, your script 2.0 and come to the next match better prepared to hopefully get your needs met while still addressing the needs of the other person. Okay, so you have the whole roadmap to do this now, and it is your turn. I want you to think about a difficult conversation, one that is really important to you, but maybe one that makes you very nervous or you've been avoiding it. I want you to think about who the other stakeholders are in this conversation and start mapping it out using the why, what, how process. And if you're working with one of our coaches and you need help, just make sure to tap your coach and get them to look over your process and give you some feedback.